All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Mike Sisson at the AACRAO office handling the technical bits. Few logistical and technical bits to get through, speaking of which. In order, if you read that chat message, if you want to interact with everybody, chat is fairly limited on this platform, but you can ask questions through the questions tab, and I'll be able to monitor those and read them aloud to Helen as we progress. And then alternatively, you can send chat messages to other attendees. You should have an attendee list within your dashboard as well. This webinar is being recorded, so if you do need to hop off for any reason, you can always access it afterwards. The link to that recording will be sent in the follow-up email to this webinar. And then finally, once Helen is done with the main slide deck, we will open up telephone lines if you raise your hand so that you can ask questions directly over however you join the audio conference, or you can simply type your questions in via the questions tab and I'll read those to Helen. As I said before, feel free to ask questions at any point. However, we will not open up any phone lines until after the main deck is over. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Helen Garrett so we can get started.
All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you, AACRAO, for sponsoring this today, and welcome everyone. So glad that you're joining us either live or watching this later. This is a webinar that's for you, and it's for your own personal journey. So thank you for giving yourself the gift of time live now or later to take a look at it. And I see a lot of my AACRAO friends and colleagues around the country are joining us, so thank you for being here today. So this is a session, Mentors and Messes, Top 10 Leadership Lessons Learned. It was created because I was doing so much mentoring and working with colleagues in UWIT, University of Washington Information Technology, and they were hearing about my mentoring, what was happening, that they asked me to do this at their large conference that they have for all their folks, 4,500 people this spring. So it went really well. It was super well attended, the highest attendance at the entire conference, oddly enough. But most importantly, I just want to share that with you, that there was just so much feedback afterwards that it was helpful. So if you just get one thing out of this, one lesson, one thing that can advantage you, I will be happy. And the I behind that happy is me, Helen Garrett. I am the University Registrar, Chief Officer of Women Information Services at the University of Washington here in Seattle. And just so thrilled to have you here today. So what we're going to be doing today is, this definitely is meant to entice, if you haven't already signed up for the AACRAO Technology and Transfer Conference, and be a precursor to a session that's going to be similar to this at that conference on women in technology and a roundtable. To tell my story, I just need to share who I am. And when I am peer mentoring with someone, I always start with doing what I'm going to do for you, which is where have you been professionally and who are you? So I'm going to model that for you. I'm then going to go through and share 10 real stories, painful as they are, of messes I found myself in or mentors that have been so important to me over the last 30 years and have made a difference in my career where I'm going, and share those lessons. It's really important as we go through that you're paying attention to those lessons learned, because I'm actually going to do an appointment challenge for you where I'm going to ask you to consider choosing one of the 10 I present and making a commitment to yourself to see what you can do in the next 2 months to work towards that yourself. So let's set the stage for why is this coming up at the AACRAO Tech and Transfer Conference. 3 things happened simultaneously. It was really crazy. So one, in early March, I presented at this huge tech conference here on my campus at the University of Washington. And as a result of that, we in UWIT started talking about the need for women in tech who are in a more male-dominated industry to be able to come together around these conversations about mentoring and curating your career. So that was happening. Then I go off to Los Angeles for the annual meeting for AACRAO, and the very first in a very long time, I'm going to talk about that today at the end of my webinar, Women's Caucus. Eva Noiki gets that started. And then there's this whole energy around, well, we in the registrar, admissions office, you know, whether we're tech or not, we also need to have support as we're moving up into these more technical careers or just moving up in our careers. And then Mark Simpson, who, as you probably know, is the director for the AACRAO Technology and Transfer Conference, reached out to that Women's Caucus and to me and to some other colleagues to say, hey, can we put together some sessions at AACRAO Tech that really talk about women in technology? So it's super cool that out of all of that was born today's moment, and to have us be exposed to that next month as we're traveling to Las Vegas. The fourth coincidence is I am a total LinkedIn guru. By the way, I used to just say, why would I need LinkedIn? I have this fabulous new job in the last 3 years. But it's a great way to connect. It's a fabulous mentoring tool. And I always find these jewels that really have an impact on me. And at the exact same time that those other 3 events are happening, one morning I'm in bed before I get up and I'm looking at things, and along comes this slide. And I know it's a little bit blurry for you, but it was transformational for me. And so the question is, why are we talking about women in technology? This is 2019. We're still worried about a gender gap. And you can bet that we are definitely still worried about a gender gap. So what this slide did is it was polling folks in terms of what's holding women in tech back. And I just want to highlight some of the jewels here that will really come up, I know, at our in-person sessions and roundtable at AACRAO Tech, but also just something to consider. So the idea is that for women who are working in still a predominantly male industry, and that tends to still be technology areas, whether it's in your own technology area in your registrar admissions or the grander central technology at on your campus. And these are some of the things that when they interviewed folks, what do you think are holding women back? So I'm going to start on the right-hand side, which is what the men said. And they're like, well, there's really a lack of technological know-how. They don't really have ambition for senior roles. There's a lack of role models. And then, you know, it's this whole work-life balance, you know, if they're going to have babies or her family, what's going to happen? And you can bet that my hackles went up in reading that column, because I'm like, are you serious? And then I go over and I look at what the women respondents, again, these are women who are working predominantly in a male-dominated industry, said. We don't have role models. There's little focus on helping us to develop our leadership and to develop that pipeline to move up. Really difficult to succeed in a bro culture, and lack an appreciation of expertise that we can offer. So as I look at these 2 different responses, and I wish that I could like have a t-shirt made, because I think the slide is just so revealing. And again, we've got lots of men and women listening today. It's not a anti-men or anything like that. But isn't it fascinating that on the left-hand side, it's nothing about being able to do work-life balance, about being flexible. It's like we have the same ability, but we're not being seen and we're not moving up. So for me, I think that gives us an opportunity within AACRAO in our own institutions to start paying attention to this. And for me, what women are looking for is really that mentoring and that role modeling. Not like we have to have someone hold our hands to move up, but if we aren't seen as a potential person to continue in our own jobs and taking on new assignments or moving up, then we're not going to break the paradigm that we have right now. So with that, what can you expect? I hope you will be joining us in Las Vegas next month, July 15th. We are having, thank you very much to Mark Simpson and the team that made this possible. So we've added these 2 new sessions. One will be in that afternoon, and so it will be this session, but I'll just be sharing 4 of the 10 I'm sharing today. And then a colleague from Boston University and a colleague from University of Las Vegas, actually an IT lead in law school, those 2 women who are technical leaders are going to do 3 each of their own mentors and messages. So I think it's going to be really cool to hear 3 different people share what I'm doing today. We then will follow it up by a roundtable, and you don't have to have gone to the session before, but the idea is to have people to have a chance to talk about it. I want to be really clear that this whole conversation is not a woman alone conversation. It is a male and a woman, all different genders, however you define and express yourself in terms of gender identity. So I'm really hoping that men will come to both sessions and not feel like it's a closed conversation. But we can't change the paradigm until we're all in this moment together. So if you're coming, I hope to see you there. So what I want to do next is give you, and as I said earlier, model for you what I do when I have a peer mentoring session, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The first thing I want to do with the person sitting across from me over our salads is, who are you? Where have you been? And because that does have a big impact on where you're going. So to kick us off, I thought I would go ahead and just share my story as a way to give you some insight into perhaps why this topic has become so important to me for the last 20, 30 years, and to also get you to think about how when you're talking to others that might be mentors or peer mentors to share your own story. So here's the story. For those of you old enough to remember Brady Bunch, which is going to be declining. I did grow up in a very intense, very intense professional family. I'm going to explain who my parents were in a minute. But in 1972, my father brought 5 of we children into a marriage with my stepmother and my mom, who had 4. So we suddenly had a family of 9 kids. Between 14 and 4 years old, in a very, very intense professional family. And not only was it a whole lot of people trying to get the attention of what's going on in my little young life, but very high expectations on all of us in terms of where we'll go professionally and what we're going to achieve. And I talk a lot when I'm peer mentoring with people about how much you want to look back at your family of origin and what are those narratives and what are those narratives that you're still paying attention to that might have an impact on where you're going. So my parents, my father was the head of the Dow legal department, so he was the general counsel and a big time lawyer for the law department, traveled extensively. And then my mom, 2 things I'll say about her. One, starting in 1972, which was actually Year of the Woman, she ended up becoming the president of the International Council of Women. She had tea with Indira Gandhi. I mean, just incredible opportunities. But I had a mom who was already well out there in terms of equal rights and really making a case for women to be able to access the same opportunities as men. Along those lines, I lived in a town in Michigan that had a university called, still does, Northwood University. Back in the 80s, when I was like in high school, my mom became the first executive leader that was a female. She became the vice president for external affairs. They wanted her to be president, but they just didn't think that it was the time for a woman to be a president. But it was my first opportunity to really start to look and see how there can be differences between men and women progressing, and how often, you know, you can imagine my mom had 9 kids from college all the way down to elementary school at that time. And I always wondered, did that also hold her back, that people just thought that maybe she couldn't both lead a university and have family? Who knows? I went off to Michigan State University, earned my bachelor's in business administration, and then went on to get my master's in college university administration. Again, coming from a very high-powered family where my siblings ahead of me went to Georgetown University. I was not supposed to go to a public university. Best decision of my life. I loved it intensely and had an incredible experience there as a tour guide and working in orientation, and it really launched my career to become a registrar. So I'm very grateful for that experience. But it was one of those key moments in my life where I took a path that maybe my family didn't have in mind for me, but it was the right path, and it's had a huge impact on who I am today. And then after Michigan State University, did my master's in college university administration, ended up at the University of Southern California, an institution I adore. Spent 2 years, 88 through 90, being a recruiter, traveling around the country for a very large private institution. Loved that experience. It was my first opportunity to really start to learn about distinguishing what is my life versus the universities. I had some balance issues and stepped into counseling for the first time to help me realize that it is hard. You can't win. You can't give everything to work and get home and be balanced. So, and then went on to a small liberal arts college in the Los Angeles area called Whittier College, where I was able to progress up through the admissions ranks and left there as director of recruitment. Had a great experience at Whittier. Had an opportunity, got a call out of the blue when I was sending resumes to Northwest to apply for and go to work for the University of Oregon. And so I became the associate director of admissions there in 1996. So moved my then husband and 2 small children up to Eugene, and continued up into my leadership. Had a wonderful opportunity to finally do what I'd always wanted to do, which is kind of weird, but be a registrar. A position opened up back in 2000 at Lane Community College, and I became the director of enrollment services registrar there. And so I was at Lane Community College proudly for 16 years until 2016, moving all the way up even to, for a couple of years, an executive position. And then I redeployed myself back to what I love, which is systems and registrar and students. Along the way, from September of 2013 and then finishing November 2016, while I was transitioning jobs and moving to a new state and a new job, I enrolled in a doctoral program at Oregon State University on community college leadership, designed to create new presidents, and got my doctorate there, very proud of that, and then came to work in the February of 2016 to be the position I have now at the University of Washington. So you can see I have a pretty big and deep tableau of past experiences where I've worked, and all of that has an input into who I am today. While I was in my doctoral program, so I have 2 degrees in leadership in addition to my master's, you spend a lot of time, which I'm really grateful, really getting us to identify what our leadership style is. And if any of you are in management or have aspirations of moving up into leadership, or even if you're not, it's really important to take the time to understand who you are and how you lead. And so certainly when I was interviewing, but I refer to these things all the time, I talk about relational leadership, and that means really seeing the people in the room, seeing the people on projects you're working on, and having that connectivity with them. I don't need to know what's going on in their marriage, but still just seeing that there are people behind it, and trying to really identify what people's strengths are and let them go towards those strengths and developing new skills. In terms of servant leadership, if you could look out my window, you see that there's a bridge from across the campus to the campus that's university students and others. I am here every day in my life to make the experience of University of Washington students better. And that servant leadership drives me, but I'm also in leadership to my team members and my colleagues to make their world better. So that's a super big focus of mine, is how can I have those that I have the pleasure of leading have a better experience, and every day that drives me for improvement. Collaboration is a word that we throw around a lot, but I am collaborative. You're going to hear I've had to get better at that because I used to think before I did my doctoral program I knew everything, and now I know I don't know anything. And I would come in with the ideas fully baked. So the idea is to make sure you're coming to any project and giving the room the opportunity to weigh in and have ideas and not direct that too much. I consider myself a visionary. I am not a detail person. I'm an ENTJ. So if we were building a new town, I'd be over the hill saying, let's build a new town, and I'd be depending on people beside me to put in sewers and systems, because I'm not at the detail level. But I do like to always be thinking one step ahead of where we're going. My birthday is July 2nd, which is right after the start of the new fiscal year and the new year for us in academia. So I'm always like, what is towards my birthday? What's the next thing coming up? Finally, I consider myself a disruptive innovator. I am a huge fan of Clayton Christensen, an MBA professor out of Harvard, that if we don't start to look at how we're using technology and using tools and being willing to do things differently, we're not going to have the innovations that we've come to depend on, whether that's blockchain I'm pushing for our industry to look at, using Siri, whatever it might be. So as you are thinking about your own self and where you're going in your career, do take some time to think about your leadership style, and keep in mind everyone can lead from where they are. You don't have to have a management position or be a director, but you can still lead in your behaviors and your work and what you're doing. So the imposter syndrome. This is where mentoring comes in and is so important to me. And I didn't realize that I had a syndrome. I mean, I knew I had the impact of it, but I knew it was called something until I recently came to get to know a woman with whom I meet once a month, who's a former CEO as a female for banks here in Seattle. And I was telling her about my life and how there are some days, like I'll give you an example. I know my boss is going to retire at some point, and there are some days like, yeah, I could do his job, no problem, I'd be amazing. And other days I'm like, oh my gosh, they would never even consider me. I didn't realize that idea that like I'm a fake or I'm a fraud or I can't do my work is actually called imposter syndrome. And it was so empowering for her to identify that for me, to say anybody in leadership that doesn't tell you they have imposter syndrome is lying, because the more responsibility you have and stepping into it, more that you're going to experience that. This slide right here, if you can read it, really is illustrative of this. So me, you know, I'm truly incredible, and anyone would be lucky to have me on the left-hand side, and also me, wow, how can anyone tolerate me even for a second is a mystery. So one of the first things when I sit down to do peer mentoring is to really talk about imposter syndrome and get that out in the room and just make that space to have that be a thing. So what is peer mentoring? A million years ago, Betty Huff from AACRAO asked me to chair the first ever mentoring group, which is kind of funny because I wasn't ready for that. But she really launched me into this idea, especially in AACRAO, but also my professional life, about the importance of mentoring. So I then came up with this concept of peer mentoring, because I always felt there was some pressure that I had to like go find this person, and it was like being on Tinder, and they were going to accept me or not, and we were going to, you know, date as mentors or something. And I came to realize, and I'm going to talk a lot about this, mentoring can be a one-time moment, it can be incidental, it can be peers, superiors to those they supervise, it can be all over the place. So as you looked at my swath of institutions for which I've worked, for the last 20 years, I have kept my lunches open, meaning they're blocked for meetings and anything else for peer mentoring. And so the idea is that people will contact my assistant or me and say, hey, can I have a peer mentoring lunch with Helen? They bring their food, they bring mine. And we just, it's faculty, it's peers, it's students, it's classified team members, it's a whole group of people. I've got some people that come every 3 weeks. I've got some people that come once. But the idea is to really have this conversation about curating your career and where are you going. And my favorite tip is thinking of your work and your resume in 3 categories, A, B, and C. And so we start out with A are the responsibilities and tasks and things that someone's going to have to pry from your cold, dead hands to take away from you. For me, that'd probably be FERPA training. C is the projects and responsibilities that if you could jettison in a heartbeat, I'd be, you know, that's gone. For me, that would be anything to do with human resources, but I don't get to choose that. A is like, or B is like, okay, things I could take or not. So what we talk about in peer mentoring is how do you get professional development experiences and exposure to those things that you want to build in column A, that you want to be part of your work life and you want to progress up in those areas, and how do you start working your way that you can jettison column C. So that's an example of the kind of thing that we talk about. People, it's also, I have to tell you, as a new university registrar 3 years ago, not new anymore, it's also been a fabulous way for me to continue to get to know the university and for them to get to know our office. So I have faculty that hear about it and come and meet with me. So it's a really natural way to build that relationship building that I need to as a university registrar with full university. Okay, so let's jump in, and we're right on track on to these 10 lessons that I learned and the mentors that had an impact on me. So I just looked back over at my 30 years of doing this work in both admissions and registrar, and thought about, there's so many more than 10, but I just thought of 10 that came to mind that really taught me some life lessons, and ones that I'm hoping that you might find one as a starting point to that could be applicable to your life. So the first one is respect is more important than being liked. Now, this is a lesson that I learned very young. When I was 20 years old in the summer between my junior and senior year, I was chosen to be one of 2 assistant director student positions in our academic orientation programs at Michigan State University. And my mentor there was the director, Mary Beth Conforti. And it was my first opportunity to be supervising 12 students, 12 peers. And I really struggled that summer because I was having to make decisions that when I was their peer, I wasn't over them, but when I was suddenly their supervisor, they would get mad that I scheduled them a time or scheduled them with someone else they didn't want to present with. And going to my mentor, I said, Mary Beth, I don't know what to do because it seems like they don't like me. And again, I hear this still all the time. And she said, Helen, you need to know that as you go throughout your career, the first thing you need to do is garnish and earn the respect of your colleagues, that they value, they follow, they're listening. And if friendship and liking you comes along, that's a bonus. But if you do it the other way, you're not going to have that respect and that, I guess, authority that you need. So I owe so much to Mary Beth, and it was, again, a hard lesson to learn, and one that I think that we face all the time, especially if any of you find yourself where you are a peer and then suddenly you apply for and get the lead job. And that happened to me at Lane Community College, where I was one of the student affairs directors, and then I became the executive dean of student affairs. And boy, did it change the likability of me. And luckily, I'd had this experience from Mary Beth to kind of fall back upon. This one kind of rude, I know, just shut up. And those of you that know me are laughing because you're like, well, you didn't learn that one, Helen, but I did. So just shut up comes from probably one of my most sacred mentors, Dr. Horace King. He was the university registrar at Michigan State University when I was an undergraduate and a graduate. And he has since passed, but I owe everything to him, to the university registrar I am today. And the reason I bring him up is, well, one, I'll talk about just shut up, but to know that sometimes a mentor may find you. It's not always about you going out and finding somebody. And he found me back then in the dark ages when we were doing in-person registration in this sweaty gym, and you moved from room to room and people passed out and it went on for 5 hours. There was something called the pit, where students would come in and using punch cards try to get their classes. I know I'm dating myself. And I would just stand there and I would help students, and they would stop crying and they'd get their problem solved. And over in the corner was this esteemed gentleman looking at me, and he came over and he said, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Helen Barker, and I'm a student." And he said, "You need to be a registrar." And I, of course, said, "What's a registrar?" So from that moment, he hired me for my senior year, and then ended up hiring me in a graduate assistantship in the University Registrar's office, where for 2 years I wrote procedures for the entire office. And I fell in love with this profession. But along the way, as I was working for him, and he was my boss and my mentor, about halfway through the program, he finally one day just slammed a book down on his desk, and he's like, "Helen, I'm going to give you the best advice of your life." What is that? He's like, "Just shut up." And I know you're laughing, those who know me, but what he meant by that was not to be rude, but to say you need to speak less and talk less, excuse me, and listen more. That there are times you're so busy talking over the other person that you don't get the benefit of listening to them. So I'm still working on that, and I know that I'm going to talk about in a minute the importance as you move up into a hierarchy of leadership. It even becomes more important that if you're the highest ranking, if you will, person in the room, you need to be the last to talk. But so Dr. King, sadly, he never saw me become a university registrar, which I didn't think I was going to because I was in a community college leadership program. But he just taught me about the profession and the sacredness of what we're doing, and really set me on this course to where I am today. And every time someone tells me I talk too fast or too much, I still think about Dr. King. This next one is one of the messes I found myself in, to say the least. And so please learn from what I'm about to share with you. And it is, I implore you to think so carefully about what you put in emails. I find myself emailing on the bus, emailing from places I won't mention, and you can do a lot of damage if you send the wrong email to the wrong person or put the wrong message in there. And I accidentally stepped into this, and I'm so grateful that I wasn't fired, but I could have been. So let me tell you this mess I found myself in. So at Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon, where I worked for 16 years, I had been in the what would be the equivalent of Registrar's Admissions Office Enrollment Services, and I was really plucked out and encouraged to apply for an Executive Dean of Student Affairs position, which, by the way, I did not want. But the Vice President saw a lot of potential in me, yada, yada. So I take the job, and I start on July 1st of 2010. And that week, we had an all retreat for all the managers and leaders on campus. And I got an email from one of my team members who did outreach, like continuing education. And the email said, we have a problem that we've hired an instructor to teach a class on what is Islam. And it turns out that no one vetted this person, and they actually are a huge hater of anything to do with Islam. So in a simple email that I sent while sitting at a retreat, not paying attention, shame on me, to my boss, I just simply wrote, just got a call from X, this person that worked for me. We have a problem with X, and I put the name of the instructor. Well, what happened, Dr. Mary Spildy, that I see there, is the president of our the college at the time. What happened is, because of this particular individual who's well known in the community, that people who do not like Muslim or Islam at all, it blew up to the point that our website was taken over. We are on national news, and it was bad. And the ACLU ended up filing a lawsuit against the college. And 4 months later, when it came down to why they had the ability to do this lawsuit, and we had to do whatever you do to respond to the lawsuit, my president called me on Dr. Spilly, and she said, Helen, I need to tell you that the reason we lost this lawsuit is because of you. And I don't know if you've ever had those moments when my blood went cold. I'm like, that's it, I'm not gonna have a job, I'm not gonna feed my children. And so she explained to me that because I said we have a problem with, and the way I wrote it, that became the heart that an executive leadership had maligned that individual. So what she said to me, and she's a lawyer by training, and she said, this is your one opportunity, and you may not ever have another, because we're not going to fire you over this, but to never again put anything in an email that can't, you know, be on the front page of the paper, couldn't go to any courtroom. And I have really, I thanked her, and I really learned from that. But I have to tell you, whether you're a public records state or wherever you're working, scrub your emails, don't send them to people you don't know, and do not put anything there that could end up in a courtroom like that. So Mary was an amazing leader for me. She was my president and my leader for the whole time I was at Maine Community College. But her willingness to see that I have potential as a leader and that it wouldn't serve anybody by firing me in that moment, it was the damage was done. But instead, she saved me to continue and to know how to manage this well in the future. So very grateful to her. Okay, this one may hit home for a lot of you, and I hope it does. And the title of this is These Bricks Will Be Here With You or Without You. So during the time that I was working at the, it's kind of been a struggle my whole life. I had kids young. When I was 23, 2 kids, and I'm pretty driven. So I was, from a young age, I was getting promoted, traveling, taking on more and more work, and really struggling with how to balance that life-work balance. I'd feel guilty when I was at home because I wasn't at work. I'd feel guilty at work because I wasn't at home, that kind of thing. And so struggled with this certainly as far back as the University of Southern California, but I was getting better. But Jim Buck, I worked with him when I was at the University of Oregon in admissions. He was the leader over a number of areas. And I remember just absolutely feeling like, because I was falling behind with admissions files, and they were coming after me because I wasn't taking time for vacation or illness. And I remember him coming into my office and being kind of nervous. Here's this high up guy here. And he said, Helen, these bricks are going to be standing here in Oregon Hall, whether you're here or not. And it doesn't mean you're important. You're not important or you're expendable. But if you're dead or you're not here or you're not working, then it's not going to help anything. And the university is going to survive long after you. That sage wisdom turned out really, really important for me, because as I've shared publicly with a lot of people, flash forward to 2004, which is a year after I overled the implementation of Banner at Lane Community College. And I had 6 weeks of vacation stocked up. I had to take 6 weeks off of work because I had so far gone over to taking care of the college first and myself second. And I hearkened back to this advice from Jim. And it turns out that by taking immediate 6 weeks off, Maine Community College still stood. The buildings didn't fall, people went on. And I learned so much from him that, one, you do need to balance yourself. You need to take care of your health and your family. And you can also know that if something happens that you have to step aside or not work, the work will continue, but you can also know that other people may step in and be stronger as a result of that. So that was just an incredible freedom for me, because I was really just trying to do too much. I had kids in elementary school. I was working, 80 hours a week. And to know that I don't need to give my life to the organization is important. And I know a lot of you struggle with that, so one to consider. This next one happened fairly recently, and I'll call it the power of an apology. This one brings shame to mind when I even talk about it, but I'm going to share it with you because my willingness, I hope, to be vulnerable today is going to empower you to feel the same and to address that. So I created a process, just had one today, where once a month, all of the advising committee members from across the university gather on Zoom or in person, and we give updates in the registrar's office and UWIT, and then for 40 minutes, they just tell us what they need. And in one of my early forums, I was talking about being able to, in implementing preferred names, that if people were worried about if they could only see a preferred name and there's a legal name, what would tie it together, I said the student ID. And this is Zoom, so it's videotaped, it's in person. And I made a horrific mistake where when I talked about the idea of the student ID, I pointed to my wrist to say, well, it's like that's the tattoo that stays with the record. Came back to my office, and some fabulous individual that today I actually don't know who it is, I don't remember, and she mentored me in that one moment, and from not at the place of position over me, she simply wrote to me and said, do you realize that when you point to your wrist and talk about a tattoo, you are actually hearkening back to the Holocaust and that people had numbers on their wrist? In that moment, I was horrified, I was embarrassed, I was ashamed, my imposter syndrome went wackadoodle, and I thought, oh, that's it, I'm the worst person ever lived. But instead, I put my own little pity party aside, and I certainly called her up and I said, I can't thank you enough for being brave enough to say that to me. And that mentoring is going to make all the difference, because it's going to cause me to think more carefully about what I'm saying. So with this slide, I just want you to know that mentoring and peer mentoring doesn't have to be this formal contract. But if people in your life, personal and professional, are willing to give you guidance, listen and pay attention to that. Thank them for that, because that can just be an enormous gift to help you be better. So I lend that to you, but it just, so I think also I went out with an apology to the entire advising community to say that I was so sorry, that I didn't mean to imply that, but my willingness to make that apology and to acknowledge it, I think gained a lot of trust from these very important partners in me that I did that. So that was a mess. Okay, this one, be the last, not the first one to speak. And I did allude to this a little bit before, and when I was talking about Just Shut Up from Dr. King. This was a very painful moment for me, and Dr. Bill Schutz is at Lane Community College, and he's the Chief Information Officer. And we had a Lucian banner product, and we had a student module core team that met every other week for 2 hours, and we talked about upgrades and what's happening with the tool. And he was new to the college and was over all of the IT folks. So he attended a number of meetings, and he called me into his office and just reamed me. And he wasn't my boss, but he just said, you have got to stop, one, being a Porsche, meaning that you come to these meetings and you are revved up and you're just already on letter K and they don't even know that they're on letter A. Secondly, you have this group of incredible advisors coming to you, but you're not even listening to them because you're so busy talking and sharing your ideas. And it was, again, I went to that place of humiliation, shame, and in the end, he just gave me an enormous gift to make sure that I wasn't going to do that in the future. So the idea is, when you look around the room, and if you're a higher level than others, be the last one to talk so that people can have a chance to weigh in. The other thing I learned from my doctoral program and for doing research that changed my life is X variables mean there's always one more good idea or variable that could change the circumstance. And before my doctorate, I used to think I had all the answers, and now I know I don't. So be the last one to speak. Give a space for people to weigh in, and even maybe postpone that weighing into the next meeting so people have a chance to give some information. When I did the session at the Tech Connect, I got a lot of feedback on this next one, on stay in your swim lane. I must have hurt a nerve for a lot of people, because a lot of people chose this as their one that they were going to pursue. And what I mean by this is, my mentor, Dr. Phil Reed, is the Vice Provost Academic and Student Affairs, and he hired me, and he's my boss's boss. And long story short, we're developing a new tool where we can track what people are thinking about in terms of majors while they're on their way to do that. And I started really talking about this in every venue that I went to. And he had to call me in and say, Helen, you are not recognizing, one, because you get a lot of things done, people think this is going to happen. And two, you have a lot of positional authority that you're not acknowledging here. But there's a lot of work I need to do in the provost's office to work with deans and chairs to prepare them for this. So I needed to stand down. And so what I learned to talk about is being in my swim lane. And what that means is to know what is my time to step up and be supporting something or advocating something. And if you think of the work of your institution as the swimming pool, it doesn't mean I'm not looking at what's in a lane over and I'm in the pool with everybody. But in this moment, stand down means have an input, but let those who are actually in charge of getting this enculturated do their work first. Some of my colleagues in of IT said, well, Helen, that's not a good message for people in technology, because they tend to really stay in their swim lane. They don't talk to each other and they're just head down. So I'm not saying don't ever get out of your cubicle or go talk to people, but just know when you are to interact with other people and when you're not. And so I said, notice a theme here. getting out of my swim lane, talking too much. You might say that's just my personality and who I am, and sometimes I win as a result of that, and sometimes I don't, but it's something I pay attention to. Cultural fluency and white privilege. This is very sacred to me, and I owe a lot to Dr. Shoal Roberts, who's now the president of Shoreline College here in Washington State, but was a vice president when I was at Lane together. And I was embarrassed to not have ever heard of the concept of privilege, or especially white privilege, until like 2006. And by reading some books together and having these conversations, she really taught me to understand the importance of cultural fluency, which is a daily commitment to understanding that we're just a cultural one, and people see the world differently, not just cultural competency, and really starting to pay attention to articles and YouTube videos and this concept of racism and othering. As a person of color in a very white community, she took a big risk in doing that. And so she taught me also how important it is to follow your true north. And even if it's uncomfortable bringing up a concept or an idea, if it's the right thing to do, and especially for our students and our colleagues, you want to step into that and make that happen. So really grateful for her. As a side note, I'm thrilled to share that over the last 6 months here in the Office of University Registrar on Women Information Services, we have a diversity, inclusion, and bias program where once a month we watch a TED Talk or a video, or we have a speaker designed to nurture the cultural fluency of our attendees. And it's optional to attend, but it's really fun to watch us turn the dial and being exposed to, again, those cultures that are different than ours, then we not only are going to bring to our workspace, but to our personal space. And so I owe a lot to Shoal for that. Honor yourself, combat the imposter syndrome. So coming back to that imposter syndrome, Dr. Philip Ballinger is my current fabulous boss, Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment Management at the University of Washington, and he, along with Phil, hired me. He doesn't want me to call him my mentor, but he is. But there came a point after about a year into this job, we finally had to set me down and say, Helen, you are the University Registrar. It says so on your business card. That's what you're being paid. You don't have to defend the people that you came from community college. You don't have to defend that you know your work. So I need you to step into the fullness of who you are and do whatever you need to do to take care of on a daily basis the imposter syndrome when voices tell you otherwise. But don't give in to that. Embrace your personal power, still staying in that swim lane and listening to others. But the importance of really recognizing what you bring to the table. And I do want to make sure that, again, you all understand you don't have to be a director or a dean or in a position of authority to have this have an impact on you. From where you sit and the work you're doing, are you stepping into your full personal power? Are you stepping into what you might bring to a project? And don't hold that back just because you don't think that you have a right to step into that. Honor all levels of colleagues. This comes from my sweet dad, R.W. Barker, who I mentioned before. And believe it or not, this came to me when I was about in 2nd grade. He, again, was at a very high level position, had a alchemical legal department. At the time, he was also the chair of the Board of Education. And back then, and these are outdated terms, so bear with me, he taught me that the most important people in any workspace are the secretaries and the janitors. Or today, we might say the office admins and the facilities colleagues. But what he was saying to me is no matter how high up and how high what you do, you need to see all the people around you. And that was such a sacred gift that he gave me. Again, I was very embarrassed that I came from such a place of privilege financially with my parents. But also, so as I've navigated my career in all these different jobs, the first people I get to know are the frontline people. Francesca and Emma, who beautifully take care of cleaning our building. We invite them to our parties. We give them presents at the holidays. They are just as important to us as any CEO or president. So just keep that in mind. So at this point, I'm going to give you a challenge. And the challenge is this. So if you're not watching this today, just advance it 2 months from whenever you're watching this webinar. But what I'd like to challenge you to do is after today, I'm going to present to you a list of all of these lessons that I learned. And I'd like you to open up your phone to August 12th, which is 2 months from today, and type in an appointment for yourself and just call it leadership skill or whatever you want to do. The idea is you're going to pick one of these leadership skills that I'm going to go over in a minute, and you're going to go through and pick one, and you're going to set an alarm so that when it shows up on August 12th, you'll be like, where's this? And it's going to say, have you made a commitment to stay in your swim lane, or have you made a commitment to be more culturally fluent, whatever you might choose. Please do this because it's going to give the gift to yourself to take this into consideration. If you do this and it works, then go on and pick another one. But I think that if you don't commit to something after attending a webinar or a session like this, it won't happen. So I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to talk through. So these are the items that I'm going to present for you. And the idea is I want you to just pick one for now. You can always go back and pick a second. But pick one of these that that resonated to, and make an appointment in your calendar and an alert so that in 2 months it opens up. And then you're going to step back and in a very loving and non-judgmental way, you're going to ask yourself, did I make a commitment to this? And how did I do moving ahead? So just to go through them, what is the one you want to pick? The idea of choosing respect over being liked, making sure that you are not just trying to be friends with everyone, but you're actually working on being respected first. Knowing when to speak and when to listen, the just shut up one. When is it a time to, do you want to speak up more? Do you want to speak up less? But just to be mindful of, are you talking over people and not listening? Number 3, carefully monitoring emails and verbalize more. I use the phone all the time now, and I do not put things in emails. I do not put things in text messages because it's public records, but also that's where you get yourself in trouble. So are you really scrubbing and looking at the to and the from and who's getting emails so you don't get on the other end of a problem like I did back at Lane? Number 4, understanding that you're not why the building is standing. Take time off. Don't work on your vacation. You're just stealing from yourself. If you even check your emails once when you're on vacation, you've just blown it, because all the goodness of being in Hawaii or being with your family or whatever it is lost because you're back at work. So just recognize you are important and you're needed, but the university or the college is going to continue without you. Number 5, apologize when you're wrong. Be vulnerable. When I made that mistake about the tattoo on the wrist, I acknowledged that and I said my apologies, but then I didn't do it again. And so making sure that you are willing to right or wrong when that happens. Number 6, be the last, not the first to speak. Again, as you move up into higher positions in particular, make sure some people are verbal, some people are written, some people can process in the moment, some can't. Honor that by, if you are running a meeting or leading a project or initiative, be the last one to come up with your ideas so that you have the robustness of everything coming in. Number 7, stay in your swim lane, keep to your work. It doesn't mean look at the rest of the pool and not get involved in other projects, but just know when it is your area to move something ahead and don't step into somebody else's lane, just so you can be a good collaborative partner but not be overtaking someone else's work. Committing daily to becoming culturally fluent. Every single day I commit to, I'm going to learn something new about the world today. I really struggle with trying to do pronouns, not to do the pronouns, but it's hard for me at age 54 to do they, is, instead of they are, and that kind of thing. So I'm really working on that and practicing that. So just like playing piano or math or anything else, my cultural fluency is a daily activity that I'm committing to. Embrace your personal power. Again, doesn't matter what position you have or where you are. Are you really stepping into the fullness of who you are? Are you curating that column A and going towards the things you want to do and be better at, and nurturing B, which is I could take it or leave it, and jettisoning column C? But really don't give up your power. Don't step into it if you've got it. And it doesn't have to do with titles. It's more just what you bring to the table. And then a lesson from my dad, that honor all levels of colleagues. You might notice if you go back and listen to this that I never use the word staff. I think it's rude. I don't talk about my staff and my colleagues, and I've done this always, and people have noticed. I do not call students work study because nobody calls me salary. I think that there are ways that we other in our language that we may not recognize. It's always hard in institutional higher education because depending who you are, you think that the faculty are over the management and the staff or colleagues or vice versa. We all matter. We're all part of this process. So make sure that your body language and your behavior and your work is really honoring that we're all in this process together, regardless of level. So I hope that you will take me up on the challenge. My email address is at the start of the webinar. It's been so fun on May 26th, and I accidentally put it on a holiday weekend. but so many people have gotten back to me from that session I did and said that it really kind of shook them to the core in terms of thinking about these things. When I finished my session, as I am right now, with about 10 minutes to go, this room of 100 people just went silent. And I thought, oh, they didn't resonate to this, I've lost them. And what I heard later from folks is, one, I remember they're all IT people, but they were shocked that I was so willing, as what they think, I don't know if I do, that as a prominent leader, I was willing to be so vulnerable. And I had some things that really got them thinking. So by looking at it 2 months later, it's going to give you a chance. So definitely write it down somewhere so you can be committed to it. But really work towards one of these things that you can codify and put that behavior into action. So moving forward, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to talk about the AACRAO Women's Caucus. And remember, this conversation about women in leadership in IT is not a female conversation, or however you want to define your gender there towards the female type. But there is some benefit to having a venue by which women who are trying to curate their career, looking for mentors and moving up, have a place to go. So I'm super impressed with my colleagues that were working again with Eva and Owicki to reinvigorate the Women's Caucus and to bring it up and have it get started, kicked off at the recent meeting. So what it is, as you can see here, is an idea just to reaffirm AACRAO's mission, vision, and values, but really focus on issues related to women. You can see there including different ways in terms of how anyone might identify. But to give, we're so used to the other caucuses in AACRAO, but oddly enough, there hasn't been a women's one, and now one exists. So the guiding principles behind that is just, again, that supporting professional and community development for women, for individuals identifying as women. And the way that they're doing that are in a multitude of ways. One is scholarship. This session, the session we'll have at AACRAO, sharing, there's a whole, I mean, this group is amazing what they've done since that meeting. They have a LinkedIn group. They have a page where you can go share books about women leadership and moving up, really celebrating scholarly achievements that we're doing and these learning opportunities. So this idea, we are institutions of higher education and we're therefore educators. How can we go to that repository of information to support women who are navigating their career at whatever level they might be? That can be done through empowerment. And again, just like talking today, professional development, career advancement, the mentoring opportunities, sharing ideas. It was fascinating for me to be in that room with 50 different individuals. They happen to be all women except for Mark Simpson, who was there to talk to us about the program. And to see that depending kind of where you are in your stage of life, different things might be more important. So my kids are grown, so I'm not focusing as much on kids, but people who are maybe in their 20s and 30s trying to decide whether to have kids, people who have them trying to decide, people who don't have kids and feel like they have to pick up the work for people who do have kids. So bringing women together, and of course, it would be insulting to say it was a whining session of any type. But the reason why I'm hoping that if you identify in the male gender area, that you'll participate in this is it's just as important for men to know that what women are going through as we're navigating it is men. Men hire women and men work with women. And so just how can we nurture where we're going and what we're trying to do. If you want to sign up, there's a link here that you can go and sign up. We're getting lots of information about books, podcasts, information about conferences and things that are going on. So with that, we're at 11:53. So Mike, I think I'll stop and see if anyone has thoughts. Doesn't have to be a question. It could be a support for what I'm saying, or if you want to follow up on anything, but we've got plenty of time to see if anyone wants to ask me anything. Or
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for presenting, Helen. Thanks for sharing your story. We similar, I would imagine, to your live session. No questions as of yet, but just as a reminder, if you do have a comment or a question, you can type that in the questions tab of your webinar dashboard. And if you do want to share a comment or ask a question over however you join the audio, just raise your hand from the attendee list there, and I'll just call on you and unmute your line.
And while people are thinking if they want to say something or weigh in, I want you to know that with peer mentoring, I have just as many peer mentoring that are done by phone or Zoom with my friends and colleagues across the country. We always have to get the time zone right, but if you wanted to get into conversation with me about anything we've talked about, I love doing this, clearly, and we all have to have lunch. So you've got my email address right there, but it honors me so much. I had 3 people after the AACRAO meeting ask if we could mentor by phone. So know that that's an offer I send out to all of you too.
Sounds great. Well, I guess we'll give people a minute or two to kind of collect their thoughts and pop in a question if they've got one. And you did mention the Tech and Transfer Conference. I just want to also mention that in the chat there, I shared a link to the event page. So if you aren't registered but you want to attend, or if you're just kind of curious about what it's all about, feel free to check that out on the AACRAO site there.
So Mike, I want to say that this is so fun to see this happen again, because I might think, oh, nobody has questions, but I think I've given so much food for thought, and I hope that people either live or watching it later will really contemplate. And this is your personal journey, so you pick out the leadership skill that you want to work on, and I'd love to hear from you if it was helpful. This isn't about me, but it is about me helping to facilitate that growth and journey. So thank you for making time for this today or whenever you're listening to it. And I do hope that you'll have a chance to come to the conference and hear 2 other voices in addition to mine at the session there.
Yeah. And Carrie just asked just a quick question if the webinar will be sent out, and the answer is yes. We'll send out a link to the recording of the webinar, both for people that attended today and for people that signed up but didn't attend. And then we'll also have a link to it on the AACRAO website shortly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike.
No problem. I don't see any other questions, and we are right about almost at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific time. So I suppose we can wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, everybody, again, for caring enough about yourself to attend. And let me hear from you. It's fun to know if this struck a chord, if it's made a difference for you. That's what I wake up in the morning to have happen. So I'd love to hear from you.
We did get one question, and it's a quick one. Are you just doing the one presentation for the Tech and Transfer Conference?
On this topic, yes. So that Monday afternoon, we'll have the 3 of us do this session again, but 3 voices, and then the follow-up roundtable. Me personally, I have another session about student data councils, but yeah, but I'll be there all weekend, and I hope if you're there that you'll come up and talk to me, even if you can't come to the session. You'll see me, I'll be wearing my bright yellow Got FERPA Questions button, so I'll look forward to seeing you there.
All right. Sounds great. Okay, and that's I think that's all. So yeah, thanks for joining, everybody, and thanks for presenting, Helen.
You're welcome. See you in Vegas.
All right, bye-bye.